20 years. Imagine that, 20 years of living in fear, waking up every single morning wondering if today would be the day the iron chariots came rolling into your village. That was life for the people of Israel. And in the middle of all that darkness, God was about to do something nobody saw coming. He was about to raise up a woman to save a nation. This is the story of Deborah. Let's go back. Long before the chariots, before the fear, before any of it, Israel had a choice to make, and they made the wrong one. They turned their backs on God. They forgot the God who had rescued their ancestors, who had parted seas and brought down walls, and instead they started bowing down to statues made of wood and stone, lifeless things, things that could never save them. So God allowed something hard to happen. He let them fall under the rule of a cruel king named Jabin, who sat comfortably on his throne in a fortified city called Hazor. But Jabin wasn't the one Israel feared most. No, the real terror had a name: Sisera. Sisera was Jabin's commander, and he was ruthless. He controlled 900 chariots of solid iron, the most terrifying war machines Israel had ever seen. Picture it, blades attached to the wheels, sharp enough to cut down anything in their path. And Israel? Israel had nothing. No chariots, no armor, no trained army, just farmers and shepherds trying to survive. For 20 long years this went on. Homes were destroyed, families were broken, roads became too dangerous to travel. The Bible even tells us that travelers had to abandon the main roads and take long, winding back paths just to avoid running into Sisera's men. Farmers stopped working their fields out of fear. Villages sat quiet and empty at night. Children grew up never knowing what peace even felt like. And finally, the people couldn't take it anymore. They cried out to God, not a quiet whisper, but a desperate, broken cry for help. And friend, here's something I want you to remember as we go through this story. God always hears that cry, every single time. He may not answer the second we call out to him, but he hears, and he is already moving. Now, in the middle of all this suffering, there lived a woman named Deborah, and Deborah was different. She wasn't just a wife, she wasn't just a mother. God had placed something extraordinary inside her. He spoke to her directly, and she carried his messages to the people. She was a prophetess. But that's not all she was. Deborah was also a judge over Israel. And back then, being a judge didn't mean sitting behind a desk in a courtroom. It meant being a leader, someone the people trusted to settle their disputes, guide their decisions, and point them back to God. And out of everyone mentioned in the entire book of Judges, Deborah was the only woman to hold that position. Think about that for a second. In a time when women were rarely given positions of authority, God looked at Deborah and said, "Her, I choose her." Every day, Deborah would sit beneath a palm tree between the towns of Ramah and Bethel, right in the hill country of Ephraim. That tree eventually became known as the Palm of Deborah, and people came from every direction just to sit before her and ask for wisdom. They brought their arguments, their heartbreaks, their impossible questions, and Deborah, with grace and courage, gave them answers rooted in God's truth. She was married to a man named Lapidoth, though scripture doesn't tell us much about him. What we do know is that Deborah's heart burned for her people. She watched them suffer under Sisera's cruelty, and it broke something inside her. She knew God had a plan to set them free. She just didn't know yet that she would be the one to set that plan into motion. Can you imagine what that must have felt like? Day after day, sitting under that palm tree, listening to story after story of families losing everything and having no power on your own to stop it. Deborah wasn't a soldier. She didn't carry a sword, but she carried something far more powerful, a direct connection to the God of the universe. And sometimes, friend, that's exactly what a situation calls for. Not muscle, not weapons, just someone willing to listen when God speaks. Then one day, everything changed. As Deborah sat beneath her palm tree, God spoke to her clearly. He gave her exact instructions on how Sisera's army would finally be defeated. And without hesitation, Deborah sent word for a man named Barak. Barak was a respected military leader from the tribe of Naphtali, a man known for his strength on the battlefield. When he arrived and stood before Deborah, she looked him dead in the eyes and delivered God's command with total confidence. "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, take 10,000 men from Naphtali and Zebulun and lead them up Mount Tabor. God will draw Sisera and all his chariots to the Kishon River, and there he will hand him over to you." You'd think Barak would be thrilled, right? A promise of victory straight from God himself. But instead, he hesitated. He knew Deborah spoke the truth, but fear had already wrapped itself around his heart. 900 iron chariots, thousands of trained soldiers, and Barak had farmers. He looked at Deborah and said something that revealed just how afraid he really was. "If you go with me, I will go. But if you don't go with me, I will not go." Now here's what I love about Deborah. She could have been offended. She could have said, "Barak, this isn't my battle to fight, it's yours." But instead, she understood him. She understood that sometimes people need to physically see that God is with them before they can move forward in faith. So she agreed. "Very well," she said. "I will go with you, but understand this, because of the way you are doing this, the honor will not be yours. The Lord will hand Sisera over to the hand of a woman." Barak had no idea what those words truly meant, but he was about to find out. With Deborah beside him, Barak sent messengers throughout Naphtali and Zebulun, calling every able-bodied man to rise up and fight, and incredibly, 10,000 men answered. 10,000 ordinary men willing to stand against the most feared army in the land, armed with nothing but simple swords, spears, and slings. No armor, no chariots, no training, just faith. Real, raw, trembling faith. They climbed Mount Tabor together, and from the top they could see the entire Jezreel Valley stretched out beneath them. It was the perfect place to wait and prepare and trust. Meanwhile, word reached Sisera that Israel had gathered on Mount Tabor, and I imagine he probably laughed. What could a group of untrained farmers possibly do against his army? So Sisera gathered every single chariot, all 900 of them, along with his massive army, and marched them toward the Kishon River. The ground literally shook beneath the weight of it. The sound of iron wheels thundering across the earth must have felt like the end of the world was coming. But friend, this wasn't an ordinary battle. This was God's battle.
Before we see how it all unfolds, take just a second to hit the like button and subscribe if you are new. It really helps us keep sharing these powerful, faith-filled Bible stories. And if you're looking to grow deeper in your faith, check the link in the description for Bible studies, journals, practical guides, and other helpful resources. Now, let's get back to the story.
As Sisera's army positioned itself near the river, Deborah turned to Barak, and this time there was fire in her voice. "Go," she declared. "This is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has the Lord not gone out ahead of you?" Something shifted in Barak in that moment. All that fear, it turned into boldness. He raised his sword and led his 10,000 men charging down the mountain like a flood being released. And then God moved. The Bible tells us that the stars themselves fought from heaven, and the Kishon River rose up and swept Sisera's army away. Storytellers across generations have painted a picture of what that moment might have looked like. The sky, clear only moments before, suddenly turning black, thunder cracking, lightning splitting the clouds apart, and then rain. Not gentle rain, but a violent, relentless downpour that turned the entire battlefield into thick, swallowing mud. Sisera's greatest strength, his 900 iron chariots, became his greatest weakness. Wheels sunk deep into the mud, horses panicked, rearing up and refusing to move another inch. Soldiers who moments earlier had felt untouchable were now slipping, sliding, scrambling to stay on their feet as the ground itself turned against them. The unstoppable war machines were now completely stuck, useless, helpless. Meanwhile, the Israelite soldiers, light on their feet with nothing weighing them down, moved easily through the chaos and surrounded the confused Canaanite army. It must have been an incredible sight, an army with no chariots, no armor, and no advanced weapons, closing in on the most feared military force in the region simply because God had turned the battlefield itself into their greatest ally. What we know for certain from Scripture is this: God threw Sisera's entire army into total confusion, and Sisera himself, the mighty commander who had terrorized Israel for 20 years, was forced to abandon his own chariot and run for his life on foot. Barak and his 10,000 men chased down what remained of the army, and by the end of that single day, the force that had oppressed Israel for 20 years was completely gone.
But Sisera, where did he run to? While the battle raged on behind him, Sisera sprinted through fields and hillsides, terrified, exhausted, desperate for somewhere, anywhere to hide. And eventually, in the distance, he spotted a tent. It belonged to a woman named Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Heber's family had made peace with King Jabin, so Sisera assumed, wrongly, that he would be safe there. When he approached, Jael stepped out to meet him. "Come in, my lord," she said gently. "Don't be afraid." Relieved, Sisera stumbled inside, and Jael covered him with a blanket to hide him. "I'm thirsty," he gasped. "Please give me water." But instead of water, Jael gave him warm milk, rich, comforting, the kind of drink that would make an exhausted man feel safe and sleepy. Sisera drank deeply, and slowly his fear began to melt away. "Stand at the entrance," he told her. "If anyone comes asking whether a man is here, tell them no." Jael nodded quietly, playing along, giving him no reason to suspect a thing. And within minutes, completely worn out from battle and fear and running for his life, Sisera fell into a deep, deep sleep. I want you to picture this for a second. The most feared man in the region, the commander who had crushed Israel for 20 straight years, lying helpless in a stranger's tent, trusting a woman he had never met to protect him. He had no idea that the very hands he trusted were about to become the hands God used to end his reign of terror. But Jael had no intention of protecting him. She knew exactly who this man was and exactly what he had done to her people. She knew about the fear he had spread, the families he had destroyed, the 20 years of suffering he was responsible for. And she knew, without a doubt, that God was delivering Israel that very day. So quietly, carefully, Jael picked up a tent peg and a hammer. She crept toward the sleeping commander, and with steady hands and unshakable resolve, she drove that tent peg straight through him. The man who had terrorized an entire nation with 900 iron chariots was defeated, not by an army, but by one woman alone in her tent. Not long after, Barak came running past, still searching desperately for Sisera. Jael stepped outside and called to him. "Come, I will show you the man you are looking for." And when Barak entered that tent, he found Sisera lying there, lifeless. Deborah's prophecy had come true exactly as she said it would. The honor didn't go to Barak, it went to a woman, Jael, someone nobody expected to be the hero of this entire story. When news of what happened that day spread across Israel, the celebrations began. Sisera was dead. His army was gone. Jabin's power was completely broken. For the first time in 20 years, Israel was finally free. Deborah and Barak stood together and sang a victory song, praising God for everything he had done, how he sent the storm, how he trapped the chariots, how he gave them a victory that never should have been possible. And in that song, they honored Jael too, calling her most blessed of women, recognizing that God used someone completely unexpected, a woman in a tent with a simple tool, to accomplish something extraordinary. And because of everything that happened that day, Israel experienced 40 years of peace, 40 years without war, 40 years to rebuild their homes, raise their children, and worship God freely again. All because one woman had the courage to speak God's truth, one warrior had the humility to follow her, and one unexpected hero acted when it mattered most. So what can we take from Deborah's story all these thousands of years later? First, God can use anyone. Deborah lived in a time when women were rarely given positions of leadership, yet God placed her right at the center of Israel's deliverance. Jael was simply a woman in a tent, yet God used her to strike the final blow. He doesn't look at status or gender or how qualified the world thinks you are. He looks at the heart, and if your heart is willing, He can use you in ways you never imagined. Second, faith is stronger than fear. Barak had every reason in the world to be afraid. He was staring down an army with far superior weapons and overwhelming numbers. But he chose to move forward anyway, trusting that God had already gone ahead of him, and that decision led to a miracle. And finally, obedience brings peace. Israel suffered for 20 years because they turned away from God, but the moment they cried out and were willing to follow His plan, even when it felt terrifying, He gave them decades of rest and freedom. 40 years, friend, 40 years of peace that came directly from a handful of people choosing courage over comfort, obedience over fear. Isn't it amazing how one moment of faith can completely rewrite the future for an entire generation? Deborah could have stayed under her palm tree and done nothing. Barak could have said no and let fear win. Jael could have looked away and let Sisera sleep safely until morning. But each of them, in their own way, chose to step into the moment God placed in front of them. And because they did, an entire nation was set free. So the next time life feels like it's throwing 900 iron chariots straight at you, remember Deborah sitting beneath her palm tree, speaking truth with unwavering confidence. Remember Barak walking down that mountain in faith, even while his hands were shaking. And remember Jael, quietly doing what needed to be done the moment her moment came. The same God who fought for Israel that day is still fighting for His people today. Thank you so much for spending this time with me and walking through the story of Deborah, the judge God used to save a nation. If this story moved you even a little, please take a second to like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on that notification bell so you never miss the next story. God bless you, friend, and I will see you in the next story.